Good morning. Today is, I'm drawing a blank, Tuesday, February 26th, and this is the Architect and Engineer Definition Committee meeting. This is a new committee that is meeting to discuss and create definitions for all four of our programs, and we are in room 1B. Notice of this meeting was posted to our website for the architects and engineers on January 31st, so it has been properly noticed. We also have a recording, and so any questions that you have, if you could, those that are on the phone, if you could make sure to state your name as you're adding things, just so that we can make sure and we may be able to recognize you, but if not, I'll stop and get everyone's name. So here in the room, we've got Ashley Gino. She's the attorney for the program, as well as myself, Roxana Gamusio, and Kathy Ware is the chair for the Definitions Committee meeting. So all three of us are in the room, and we have participating electronically. If you could answer to confirm that you're there when I call you out, then I will turn it over to Ms. Ware. Chairman Robert Campbell Jr.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Frank Wagster.
Here.
Ms. Susan Ballard.
Here.
Thank you. And Mr. Blair Parker.
Here.
Okay. All four of our members joining us telephonically are present. And Kathy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Roxana. I just want to go on the record as saying that Robert promised me he'd keep his mouth shut because he's not actually on the committee. So, Robert.
Okay, this is like I am, but I'm the chairman of the board, so I figure I'll at least listen, right?
We will allow you to listen, but you have to mind your manners.
I'm going to put you on mute so you don't hear a damn thing I'm saying.
No, we appreciate you being a part of it. You know we do. Let me just start with one clarification, and that is that this is a rules committee to discuss and then maybe make a recommendation to the board relative to whether or not we do want to include definitions, and if so, what they might be. But I don't want to make the presumption that the committee is going to go there. That's the whole purpose of the committee, is to decide whether or not we want to have definitions, and if so, what they will be. So I just want to put that on the table, make sure that y'all don't think that we've already had that foregone conclusion. That's the whole point of the committee. Okay. So let's start with just a review of current status where we are. And interestingly enough, when I asked Ashley, who was very helpful in all of this process getting ready, what exactly it was that we had definitions for, she was able to share with me that we currently have definitions for a registered interior designer, which was actually put into place in 1991 and modified in 1997. Susan, did you know that? You probably do.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so I didn't know that. So there's actually something in there, although I think it's interesting. The registered interior designer is defined as someone who is a registered interior designer. And then we also have a definition
I
for...
didn't say I wrote it.
No, I didn't. No, I know. But I thought I read it and I went, well, that's cool. Yeah, I like that. And then we also have a definition of the board. The board is actually defined as, what the board consists of. But those are the only definitions that are actually in our rules and or statute. So anybody quarrel with that? Because that's all that Ashley found. That's all I'm aware of. Alrighty. So therefore, I also just want y'all to know kind of the ground rules. If, therefore, we decide that we do want to have definitions, then there are two potential ways to do that. One is a rulemaking and one is a change to the statute. And it is highly advisable that we go the rulemaking process if at all possible, because of course the statute involves the legislature, et cetera, et cetera. Ashley gave a very well thought out memo relative to the rulemaking process. I believe it was submitted at our last board meeting. Ashley, is that correct? Or did it go to everybody? I can't remember.
This one wasn't submitted at the board meeting. I sent it to Roxana, and I think she sent it out to
Kathy has it just.
Okay, so I'm the only one that has this. It is not for distribution, attorney-client privilege. Sometimes I know these things are on the record out there. But basically, she wrote a rulemaking process memo that describes the statutory amendment and the rule adoption process. And again, if we are going to go down this path, then the most likely process that we would use to implement definitions is going to be the rulemaking. If we decide we want to go to a statutory amendment, of course, that's at the committee's discretion if we want to go down that path, but it is obviously a lot more involved and takes a lot longer. So, any questions on that from committee members? Or Robert, if you have a
This is
comment?
Susan. Yeah, this is Susan. I'm fine with that process. So, I think just getting everything updated for our team is very important. And so if rulemaking is the best way to do it, I'm all about it.
I think that's right. Rulemaking probably is the way we're going to have to go.
This is Frank. I agree. This is Blair. I agree.
Okay. All righty. So let me just, this is the first time I've held one of these positions as a committee chair, so if at any point you guys want to jump in and ask questions, please do so. I'm not trying to be too structured, but I did try to come up with kind of a series of discussion points, and this would be the first one that was on my list, and that is that when we're doing rulemaking, we have to take into account various interested parties. And I kind of am familiar with the industry groups, such as, from the engineer's perspective, TSPE, ACEC, et cetera. But I'm not as acronym friendly, if you will, for the other disciplines. And I also think that there are other interested parties that are not industry related. And it might be helpful if we just kind of went through those, because as we do the rulemaking, I'm very cognizant of the fact that we don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole and then suddenly have someone pop up that has real heartburn with what we're doing and taps the brakes on us. I'd rather that we make sure that we're including everybody that we need to. And Roxana mentioned, deans of colleges, et cetera, that kind of stuff. So by discipline, and Blair, I'm going to pick on you and start with you first. Can you just list the industry group name that you would think would have the most interest in this particular issue, or groups, plural, that we want to make sure that we are keeping in the loop on this, and then any other large heading group? I don't need you to name every school of landscape architecture or anything, but just other parties, stakeholders that you think would need to be aware of this so that we didn't exclude them from the process as we go.
Well, the primary organization would be the American Society of Landscape Architects. And the Tennessee chapter is very active, and they have been informed that we are going to begin an evaluation process.
Awesome.
So they would be the primary group. We unfortunately only have one school of landscape architecture, but I think they would need to be involved. Is everybody there? Did I lose you?
Somebody just called in.
Yeah, this is Don
Okay.
Baltimore just calling in. I couldn't get it on the website. Sorry, something must be wrong with my computer here. So thank you for letting me call in.
Oh, we're glad to have you. Thank you.
That is the primary. I mean, that truly is the primary group. There are some other organizations that come and go here or there, but it's the American Society of Landscape Architects that would be the primary group.
All righty.
So starting with us is an easy one.
Well, you just played right into my hand, and I greatly appreciate it.
Well, I do think that CLARB will certainly be interested. Council of Landscape Architecture Registration Boards, but this is what they do. So anyway, those are the only organizations I can think of at this moment that would be primary.
Okay, great. Susan, can you enlighten us on the?
Yes. So the American Society of Interior Designers, the International Interior Design Association, both work together to develop this new definition. And so I know that they are actually interested in the process. I'm sure the deans of the schools would also be interested in. There is one organization that called IDS, Interior Design Society. We could bring them to the table, although they're not really active in board registration. They do residential primarily. And, of course, NCIDQ is the one that has issued the new definition, and so they have been involved. So we have, we've already endorsed it through NCIDQ, which is our credentialing board. And I've not had any feedback from anyone asking for changes when I have sent it out to the two other organizations. And those two were represented at the NCIDQ meeting back in November. So they are aware of it on a national level as well.
I think Ashley's trying to take notes as we go, so if you don't mind, can you state a little slower for those of us who were born in the South, what those acronym-heavy groups are and what they stand for?
So ASID, just say when, Ashley.
I got that one. American Society of Interior Designers.
Yes, and then IIDA,
Stands for?
is the International Interior Design Association. Sorry, my dog wants in my office, and I've got the door closed, and she can see me barking. So anyway, the NCIDQ. Do you have that one already, Ashley?
I don't have that one.
Okay, that's the National Qualifications, or National Council for Interior Design Qualifications.
Thank you.
Okay. And then IDS is the Interior Design Society, and primarily those are individuals who are self-proclaimed, not necessarily credentialed or educated. It's typically an older group that will probably phase out, I would say, over the next 10 years. So, in general, so.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that. Anything else you want to add to that list of stakeholders?
No, not really. We've got some smaller organizations that just do healthcare, but I think there's only a few hundred of those across the United States, and they were represented at the meeting as well. So I think we're good as far as where we stand in Tennessee. Okay?
Okay, awesome. Frank, you're up next.
Oh, thank you so much. There's two main societies, I guess you'd call it. The AI is a society, American Institute of Architects, and of course you see Ashley on a regular basis, who represents the Tennessee AI, and the AI has a recommended definition of the practice of architecture, as well as the other main group that we deal with is the NCARB, the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards. And, you know, I'm NCARB on a subcommittee, but they represent the architectural board members in the U.S. And they have a definition also, which is 99% the same thing as the AIA's recommended definition. And those are the two main ones. Now, I may have a little different opinion on universities. I mean, we've got two architectural schools in Tennessee, UT, and then the master's program at University of Memphis. And then we've got a startup I've heard at Belmont, which may be 2 or 3 years out. I'm kind of thinking, particularly coming up with a definition should be but among us and the advice of our societies, and then once we've agreed on something, that run by the universities. But you know, I think if we get too many people involved with too many angles, no telling what we'll come up with.
Well, yeah, I agree, Frank. I wasn't suggesting that we involve them in any of the workings of the committee or even the workings of the board per se. as we go through this process of deciding what we want to do. But as Roxana pointed out, we do want to make sure that we at least give them a heads up at some point along the path. So if we're going to go down this path of rulemaking, that we give them a heads up so that we can get their buy-in, as opposed to them feeling like they didn't have a chance to weigh in, and then they stop the rulemaking because they get the ear of somebody and say, "Hey, this is going to hurt our student population," or something like that. So it's not that I want to involve them in the discussions we're having or the committee meetings, or ask them what their opinion is. That it's not that per se. It's just that I don't want to be blindsided by anyone who comes along later and says, "Hey, we're gonna go see somebody. We don't like this. We're gonna go see." I just want to give them a heads up. So, but now's not the time.
Yeah, I think you're saying the same thing I was.
Okay, all righty. Well, I think we're on the same sheet of music on that. So, did you get you got what you need, Ashley? Okay, I was pointing at Ashley. Sorry. All right. So for the engineers, obviously, like Frank said, industry associations, and there's a few more of those than probably for the other disciplines that we've mentioned. But TSPE, ACEC, ASCE, SEI, ASHRAE, IEEE. Ashley, are you catching on this? I'll give you this list later. How's that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Robert, can you come up with any that I've left off the list when I was just talking about industry associations?
Not really. I mean, there's each discipline's kind of got their own, and I think NSP and TSP and ACEC kind of are the umbrella that cover everybody else. So
Yeah.
we're pretty close on everything.
Okay. So also we would say the deans of various engineering schools, and then I was wondering, Robert, if you have a thought on this, but whether or not we need to involve any of our large professional liability insurance carriers to give them a heads up so that they don't wave a red flag at something and say, "Oh, you're defining engineering, and we don't cover that." We wouldn't cover that. If you said that was engineering, we wouldn't cover that under our professional liability policy.
I think that's a great point.
There's a few that kind of represent 99% of the insured parties in the state of Tennessee, and I think we probably ought to give them a heads up on it too.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
And that's probably across the board, if I would be guessing, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about that for everybody. And then I didn't have any other stakeholders like that anybody wants to throw on the table. That's kind of all I had. Alrighty, well, let's move along then. So the next thing on my list was just to kind of have an informal poll. I just wanted to make sure that we are all kind of on the same sheet of music. So do you, and I'm asking you personally, the members of the committee, do you believe that now is the time that we do need to have definitions for each of the appropriate disciplines? And this isn't a roll call or anything, but I'm just saying, do we all feel like now's the time to do that? This is what we want to do for all four of the named disciplines.
This is Susan. Yes, I feel like we need to update ours, and next year I rotate off the board, and so I'd like to get this accomplished before I leave, and that's my vote.
Susan, I appreciate that. Frank and Blair, y'all are of the similar mind? Yes, we need to do this?
This is Frank. Yeah, I think we definitely need to move forward with this.
This is Blair. I'm sitting on the fence. I'm not really sure why we need to.
Okay.
I don't know that I'm opposed to it, but I think I would like to hear more convincing arguments or reasons why. And I feel like this comes back to the legal side of things and being able to take care of disciplinary issues.
Okay, well, I really appreciate that, and I just want to again, I want to make sure that we all know what we're trying to accomplish, and it's certainly great to have somebody on the fence or even who dissents, because that makes for great conversation and helps us all think through the process. So, so then
You're not going to hang up on me?
we're not going to cut you off. We're going to let you stay. I'm not even going to kick you off the committee. You can stay.
Okay.
The corollary to that same question is: do you feel like your members of your discipline in the state of Tennessee feel likewise? And if so, can you elaborate a little on either, my group, AIA, we've talked about this a lot and we think XYZ, or, I go to engineering meetings all the time and, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just curious, is anybody have a feel one way or the other, strongly or lukewarmly, that their particular discipline has a position at this point relative to the definition process?
Well, this is Frank, and I have had feedback from the Tennessee AIA that they think it's a good idea to have a definition of an architect. To fully answer your question, I'd say 90+% of the lay people have no idea whether they've been defined or not, or whether being defined makes a difference. I just don't think that's a topic that I hear coming up in architectural or in AIA or NCARB meetings.
So your perception is that 90% of the practitioners of architecture are neutral on the position?
I don't think they're sitting around wondering what an architect is. And are we properly defined? This seems to have come up, to come to a head, if you want to say it that way, at the last formal hearing that we had, where I think the judge, maybe I'm misquoting, but I believe what the judge said, it would be a lot easier to go through a formal hearing if there was a definition of what an architect is.
I have to say I wasn't there. I wasn't part of that particular. You're talking about an actual disciplinary hearing that was conducted?
Yes.
Yes, I wasn't here for that, so I don't know.
And Frank, you are correct. They did state that. Susan.
And following up on that, and again, I'm not a proponent of making this last forever, but I think it would be good if, and maybe it's Ashley that would do this, is to get recommendations or information, if you want, from the legal profession as to how having a definition helps or hurts, or whether it's valuable if we get into formal hearings. If the formal hearing is about whether you're improperly practicing architecture or not, then you need a definition of what practicing architecture is. Otherwise, it becomes subjective.
And this is Blair. I will add that with that definition, it probably needs to have some specificity to it, because otherwise it doesn't do any good, right? In that scenario, Frank.
That's the reason I'm saying maybe some legal advice might be.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
The more you say, the worse off we are.
Yeah, there's a lot of different opinions on that. I think that's a really good idea, though, relative to getting maybe a attorney-client privilege memo like what we've been doing to look at that for us. But we're not going to ask for that right this second. I'm just going to hold on to that as a thought. So I'm not asking Ashley to do that just yet, but we'll come back to it. And I think that's really good input. Anything else, Frank, or others?
This is Blair. The Tennessee ASLA, their first question is, why do we have to do this? And I believe the majority of the executive committee, which are representatives throughout the state, have asked that same question. But when I explained to them that defining the profession is I believe will probably help us, but I can't say it convincingly because I still need to be convinced. But going back to how they feel, I think that we are all a little confused as to why it's necessary. And I think the core concern is that landscape architecture is it is such a different design field, and we do a little bit of work that some people consider engineering, and we don't practice architecture. But my point is that we really connect sort of the dots in between the various professions, including land surveying. And that's what our education is all about. So defining our profession is not necessarily an easy thing. And I think that's what the core concern would be.
All righty. Susan, do you think your discipline members are for, against, neutral, don't care? Do you have a feel for that?
Oh, I think they're four, and this one is more updated and it's more reflective of what we do as a profession. Going back to HDTV as usual, have just blasted us, that anybody can do what we do, and what we do is not what you see on TV. And so I think having a definition will strengthen our profession and separate us from what goes on as entertainment on television. So.
All righty. I hadn't thought about that, but that is interesting. I can see where that would be a problem.
Yes, it is a problem. And if it were to ever be entertaining for you all to have your professions on TV, you would see how detrimental it really is. So.
I hear Robert's got a real-life drama documentary in the works, don't you, Robert?
My life is a real-life documentary.
RGA Gone Wild. That's what it's going to be
You
called.
should have seen us in the water out of my mom's basement the last few days. You would have thought that.
All righty. Well, as the engineering representative on this particular committee, I will tell you that I think that we're kind of like what Frank said, is that 90% of the practitioners of engineering would be neutral or would say, really, we don't have a definition? I didn't know that. Because, anecdotally, I've asked a lot of people in the past couple of months since this topic's been a little bit more talked about at meetings, and when I'm around peers, I'm like, hey, blah, 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 what do you think? And they're like, oh, really? There's not a definition? So I think from my perspective, the driver is more about the disciplinary perspective, and having listened to not necessarily the hearing that you guys are talking about, because that was before I was on the board, but people like Stephen King who say, it comes up relative to complaints and the clarity that such a definition would provide with regard to complaints filed against people who are practicing outside their area of expertise or practicing without a license or calling themselves an engineer when they do not have a license, et cetera. So I think that's a little bit of the background that I hear most about relative to whether or not we need a definition. And Robert, since you're the chair of the overall board, but you're an engineer, anything you want to add to that?
I think you're right. I think the populace could care less. I think they're more concerned about decoupling and some of those things. I don't that the definition helps. I'll say this quick thing. From a legal standpoint, I got it. It will help strengthen us. But I think along with kind of what Susan said, it may, and this is a kind of a slippery thing we need to be careful of. I don't want this to be seen as a barrier to competition, because once you define something, you, by, again, definition, are defining where your limits are. And so we need to be cognizant of that, I think. Although I think we need to have some barriers to entry to our professions because they are learned and professions and not just something you just go pick up a hammer and start doing or whatever. So that would be my only comment on that.
Well, a really good point, and I think that that's one of the things that you run into when you have these exceedingly lengthy definitions, is when you're trying to just include everything, including the kitchen sink, into a definition, and by virtue of that, you create barriers to competition. That's clearly not what we're trying to do, but something we need to be cognizant of as we move through the process. So, thank you. Alrighty, so I guess I have the next item that I'd written down is that does anybody other than Susan, and I know Susan does because she gave it at the board meeting, does anybody want to submit for discussion any specific definitions today for the committee to talk about? And Susan, can I make that assumption that the one that you gave us at the last board meeting would be, if we said, so what's your definition for interior design? That would be what you would want to submit. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement because it was vetted and voted on by the national delegation. And so I would not want to change it. It's been approved across North America. So.
Okay.
This is Frank. I wasn't at the last board meeting, but Susan, is this the 2019 CIDQ version?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's a little.
Do you have a copy of it, Frank?
I do. It's 2.5 pages.
No, there is. I'm sorry. There is a short paragraph at the top that they did a summary of all of that information, and that's what we're asking for the rulemaking change.
Yeah, I had printed out what they had, and you're saying it's the first paragraph?
Yeah, you may not have the last version, so let me pull it back up, and I will send it out to everybody. That's all right, or do I need to send it to you, Roxanne, and let you send it to everybody?
Go ahead and send it to me. That way, after the meeting, I know that Blair has also sent his email. We'll make sure to kind of put everything together, and then I'll resend Kathy's or whatever else we come up with so everybody has it after we're done.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Frank, at the top of it, it has the abbreviated definition of interior design, and it is one paragraph. And then there's the full definition that I'll be sending to her right now. And
yeah, what I've got is called the full definition of interior design.
Okay, they did an abbreviated version for legislative purposes, and that way it was cleaner, easier to get the job done. So,
right. Well, does it in any way? I guess I'll look at it, but does it in any way refer to the full definition?
Would you repeat that? I'm sorry.
The reason I'm asking that is, I don't want this to sound rude, but what I read in the full definition, it's like you're an architect, except you don't do structural and seismic design.
I'll read this to you. I don't read it the way maybe the full definition comes across to you. It says interior design encompasses the analysis, planning, design, documentation, and management of interior, non-structural, non-seismic construction and alteration of projects in compliance with applicable building and design and construction, fire, life safety, and energy codes, standards, regulations, and guidelines for the purpose of obtaining a building permit as allowed by law, because in some states you can. Qualified by means of education, experience, and examination, interior designers have a moral and ethical responsibility to protect consumers and the occupants through the design of code-compliant, accessible, and inclusive interior environments that address well-being while considering the complex physical, mental, and emotional needs of the people. To me, it says you're not moving walls, and you are complying with codes.
Well, and of course, I guess they cover themselves by saying as allowed by law.
And guess who added that to the list? Yours truly. So.
Yeah, because They were saying you could get a building permit from.
Well, actually, you can in Knox County if it's under a certain square footage, but I never have gone that route because most of mine are over that. But anyway, but yes, I had been to add the phrase "as allowed by law" because each jurisdiction has their own regulations, and that needed to be clarified in this. So,
Well, you did good.
well, thank you. Don was sitting there right next to me. So anyway,
That's right. Oh, Madam Chairman, do you mind if I give just a little background?
Oh, go ahead, Don.
I guess I have the most institutional memory here. Years ago, it'd be back in the 90s when the Interior Design Title Act was adopted. The general counsel for the board, Thad Watkins, and then later his successor, Christy Allen, he and she were of the opinion we don't want definitions because then the board might get into more arguments and hearings over you're stepping onto our line. I personally think we've gone a little bit beyond that now. But also as a reminder for legal, and I don't think this is a problem, I think it should stay as it is, there's a definition of interior design in the Home Improvement Contractors Act. We put that in there to make sure that interior designers can do interior design and not have to be considered or register as a home improvement contractor. But I think that just stands and applies for that law, and I don't see any roadblock to adopting this definition that's proposed. But I just thought I'd put that out there for legal to remember. Plus, I'm old, and I have to talk about the past.
The providing a legacy of information of what's gone on before us is always useful. Thank you. Alrighty, so we kind of know where the definition for interior design stands, courtesy Susan, and that was really useful. We've seen that, except Frank was not at the meeting, so we'll get that out via Roxana. She'll send that out again. Definitions for either architecture or landscape architecture. Is there something specific that already exists that you want to submit for discussion, Frank and/or Blair?
This is Frank. I do have one I can submit. However, and when I corresponded with the NCARB, apparently they're in the middle of a modernization of model law and regulations, and part of that is they're looking at revising the definition that they have now.
Where are they in that process on the timeline of doing that?
When I asked that, I didn't get an answer. But let me press that a little further. But I can submit what is now available. And like I said, it and the AIA's version that they passed on to us is pretty much the same.
So, and not to try to corner you on this, but do you think that the current version, as you have it from NCARB, which you think is similar to what AIA would support, is that something that you feel like would be acceptable to the AIA general population in Tennessee? I mean, do you feel like that's...
I believe so.
Okay.
I think the AIA pretty much relies on the NCARB when it comes to things to model law.
Okay. Good enough. All righty.
And this is Blair. I would really like to follow that same lead. I would love to think that the CLARB definition or model law we would be able to use that. When I read it, I find it very generic, and maybe that's going to be fine. I don't know. The American Society of Landscape Architects also provides a definition, which I also find very, very broad, which our profession is. I'm just not sure that we're going to be able to I think we're going to have to define it more clearly than what I read from ASLA's definition. But I like the idea of going with Clark's model law if we can make that work. And they do have model law at this moment. I did send each of you, Don, you were not part of that email, but earlier, maybe 10:15 this morning, I sent an email with one definition, which is a combination. It's taking several definitions from various states and sort of combining it and making sense of it and trying to make it as concise as possible. That has not been necessarily reviewed by ASLA as the group or approved by ASLA. That is Blair Parker going through with a couple of other people looking at definitions that we think are appropriate.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Well, again, if you send that to Roxana, then she will send it out to everybody as an official attachment as a follow-up to this. Is that how you want to do that, Roxana?
Yes, and just a quick reminder to make sure that even though we're having the committee meeting and we're all together and on the record and so forth, any of these documents are always better to just send to me so you're not communicating between each other. That way, everything that you want to discuss about the definitions, et cetera, can be while we're at the meetings. And I'll make sure to get everything else that we need to everyone.
Alrighty. And let me just follow on. That's.
so Roxanne,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Let me just complete this. So, Roxanne, I'll send you the Clark's model law and the ASLA's definition.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Blair.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is Don. Can you send those to me as well?
Absolutely. I'll include you in the email with the group and everything else. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I was going to say that what Blair said relative to those existing definitions at the national level is a good segue to what I would share with people with regard to the practice of engineering as defined by NCEES. I'll read it to you what the general definition is. You might have it, you might not from the last meeting we had, but it's pretty broad. The practice of engineering defined as any provision of or optimization of service or creation of work for others, the adequate performance of which involves specialized education, knowledge, and experience within the field of applied mathematics and science with the potential to impact the health, safety, and welfare of the public. That's kind of the introductory paragraph. There might be some words that are moderately different, or not much, but that's kind of the standard paragraph that almost all states that have a definition open up with, and it's based off the model law for NCEES, which, as you can hear, is very, very, very broad. And then the other states, of which Ashley put together a complete compendium of every law across the country that defined engineering, has everything from soup to nuts thrown in there. And you could, if you go through and read it as I did, you can see that there has to be certain case law that has transpired in certain states that has caused them to modify their definition accordingly in order to accommodate, a previous hearing or a previous finding or in a court of law. So there are a lot more things to consider for definition of engineering. And I would tell you that we are certainly, I would not suggest that engineering is at the point where we have anything that I'm going to come back to this committee and say, here you go, we got it, this is what we want to submit. I think it's going to require a lot more work on behalf of the engineering committee, of which we have 6 members, and that's where I think we are relative to defining engineering at this point, is that I'm going to go back to that committee and say, okay, guys, we need to start getting serious about defining engineering, and then start trying to plug all the holes of how much do we want to try to tie it down, how broad do we want it to be, what's included, and in some cases, maybe even some of the things that are not included, because that's one of the things I read with interest on the summary of all the different states. So unlike interior design, architecture, and landscape architecture, I do not have a definition of engineering that I would suggest to you as something that we're ready to even discuss, much less adopt. Robert, anything you want to add to that?
I think that's accurate. There's a lot of edges, but within our own profession, we've got a lot of things that we've got to get worked out.
Kathy, this is Frank.
Yes, sir.
I've kind of gone through different what kind of like you're saying, what the different states have, and it runs the gamut from short paragraph to 2 pages. But what I see consistent, and probably where a lot of the different, or maybe not differences, the sameness actually, and especially between engineering and architecture is, or where the caution is in incidental practice. And both the engineering definitions that I've seen and the architectural definitions that I've seen refer to an engineer can do incidental as long as they're qualified, and paraphrasing. The architectural says, something like an architect can perform such engineering work as is incidental to the practice of architecture. And it seems like, when we have cases that come up in front of us, a lot of times it's an architect practicing engineering or an engineer practicing architect. And I guess how that's defined is probably the toughest part of any of these definitions. I'm not sure I see as much as reference to incidental practice in the interior definition, or what Blair just sent in the landscape definition. But I think when we're defining ourselves, I think that's where we need to kind of all be together.
Well, I agree with you, and I'll tell you. So let me read you the kind of I won't say standard, but it's pretty common. I saw it in a lot of the states had this particular paragraph. This is how it kind of reads. The practice of professional engineering does not include the practice of architecture, comma, as defined in, and then there's a cross-reference, comma, but a professional engineer may perform architecture work as is incidental to the practice of engineering, as long as the professional engineer is adequately qualified to execute the work with regard to health, safety, and welfare of the public.
Right.
So
Yeah.
something like that being cross-referenced in the definition of architecture and the definition of engineering, do you feel like something along those lines is what you're talking about? We need to make sure that that's in there, or that we agree to that.
I think if there is some desire of any profession to do something in the other, I don't know how to say this, practice in some aspect of the other profession, that needs to be defined if we can.
Mm-hmm.
It's like landscaping and surveying. I'm sure there's probably some crossover there. Blair, you might speak to that a little bit. But
There is, and Frank, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Kathy, I like how that reads, actually. That's pretty specific,
Yeah, I didn't write that, but it is. I thought it was really well written. I mean, it does help you understand that there's going to be some crossover in the disciplines, and it will be left to the judgment of someone else, some other party, be that the board or a judge or a detective or whatever, as to whether or not the person is quote unquote adequately qualified. And then it makes that adequately qualified for the purposes of health, safety, and welfare. Now, are you saying, Frank, that you feel like we're going to have these paragraphs or some change to this type of a paragraph that allows Susan to practice architecture incidental to interior design? Am I saying that correctly, that you're looking for those types of assurances that everyone has the ability to cross over and not be in violation of the rule as long as they're qualified? Or is that what you're saying?
I'm actually saying if that is intended, then that needs to be spelled out. I mean, Susan, you might chime in on that, but
I love you, Frank, but I don't want to do your job. I have enough to do of my own. But there are always people who are going to break the law, and I think as clean and clear as we can make it, it's going to help us do our job better. It's going to define it better for the health, safety, and welfare. And there's no way we can stop residential remodels. And so, to me, our laws need to be more specific to commercial, nursing home, hospitality, hospitals, things where people are in the care or of someone else, and where the fire codes and the flammability of the products being used can be detrimental to them getting out of the building if they're not done correctly. I just don't know how we could ever, dictate residential design, although some states have managed to do it. I just don't see that in Tennessee at this point.
Susan, do you feel like this qualifier of as long as the profession, I'm not going to say which one, but as long as the profession is adequately qualified to execute the work with regard to health, safety, and welfare of the public, does that give you the assurance that you're looking for?
Y'all are going to put me in a corner here, aren't you? I think you're qualified if you know what you shouldn't do, that you have a greater understanding of the process. And because I work with architects all the time, because my projects are, multi-million-dollar ones for the most part, I know where my job begins and ends and where theirs, overlaps with mine. And we work together collaboratively. So that's not the case with everybody. And so I don't think we can qualify it that way, because I think anybody, I know how to do this, will just take it and run with it. I think we need to be more restrained in our circumstances, because I know of one design firm in Nashville that does a lot of your multi-story buildings. There's a lot of partition walls. She wants to be able to take those down without an architectural stamp. And my thought is no. We still need to work together collaboratively and make sure that everything's being looked at with a second set of eyes. And so while we are friends, we disagree on that viewpoint. And I think we need to leave that, as a barrier, I guess you could say. And I'm probably not going to be liked for saying that, but there's a reason why there's an architectural degree, and there's a reason why there's an interior design degree. And I think there's a point where we have to respect each other's, education and experience. What do you think, Frank? So I'm going to err on the side of caution. I'm just going to put it that way, okay? Because you really can't. I'm going to say this about the students that are coming out of school right now can do all of these wonderful computer programs, but I'm not seeing that they're being taught how to critically think and evaluate and determine how a design should be done. And just because you have a piece of paper doesn't mean you have all the information that you need to make those kind of decisions. So it's definitely on a case-by-case basis, and I don't think we can just write a paragraph and say, if you think you're qualified, you can do it. I just don't. So
I don't think we say it. This paragraph does not say that the person thinks that they're qualified. It says, as long as the professional fill-in-the-blank discipline, PE, architect, etc., is adequately qualified, which is the teeth to the law, because then you prove that they are not, and that's how they become found to be in violation of the rule. So it's not a self-professed, I'm qualified, therefore I can do this. I don't think that's the intent. I'm sorry if I misled you on that.
No, I hear it from different perspectives. I hear real estate agents who say they're interior designers, and I said, well, I don't have a real estate license, but I could go, help somebody, buy a house. And I had to point it out to them that way, So because we don't have a hard, fast license that says you can't do this unless you have this certificate and this education, we have to fight a different battle from you all. So
I understand.
That's where I'm concerned. Okay.
I understand. Well, I guess that kind of leads into what I was going to suggest is maybe our take-home assignment. Are we scheduled for 1 hour?
We don't have an ending time, so it's up to you all.
Okay. I'm going to call us at 1 hour. Everybody like that? We can talk as long as y'all want to, but I kind of felt like 1 hour is for the introductory meeting was about as long as we needed to go. But I was going to suggest that our homework assignment might be then that that each of us go back to our various population of practitioners that we represent. And in my case, that would be the engineering committee, of which there are 6 members, and propose to them, you know, this is what I'm going to suggest is the definition, and then come back with that specific language for discussion at our next committee meeting. Because I'm not of the impression that we're ready to start talking about exactly what the language for the definition needs to be across the board. What do y'all think? Hang on. I'm getting a flag from from the attorney.
I just want to make sure that y'all know not to communicate with each other outside of the public meetings.
I didn't say each other. I said the population at large.
Okay, I just wanted to.
No, that's okay. But no, I'm suggesting, for instance, that if Blair is, as an example, that Blair has already said, here's what I think is going to be the definition. And so I'm, and we can talk about this as long as y'all want to, but I think the next step for this committee is for each of us to feel that we are affirmatively representing the population. So for Blair, as an example, to be able to say at our next call, meeting, etc., I'm going to suggest that the following be entered into the record as the recommended definition for landscape architecture. Or I've done some polling, and the landscape architects do not want to be defined as to their practice, and therefore we prefer to remain silent, or something in between. But I believe that that is kind of the next step, and the reason I said for me is because we already have a committee. So the engineers already have a committee. We have a committee of 6, so I don't have to do anything special to poll my people. My people are co-defined as, yes. So is that okay? I mean, the engineering committee is only going to meet as a committee. I'm not suggesting that we're going to meet outside of our committee structure.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I should have left that part out. But Blair doesn't have a committee.
Right.
So he's not going to talk to another landscape architect on the board. He's going to talk to other landscape architects in general.
Right.
Okay. She said right. Okay. So discussion.
Kathy,
I would like to say that I appreciate you all bringing me into this group. I know you didn't have to. And so I just appreciate your all's consideration of my circumstances. So this is Susan.
Kathy, this is Frank. I think what I'm hearing is that I can't talk with Rick and Brian without it being at one of our next, let's say our next meeting.
You can have a phone call with them just like we're having. All you have to do is just tell Roxana with 48 hours notice. And then she makes it known that she makes a public notice that the 3 of you are going to discuss the definition of architecture or something like that.
Now, Frank, once you send me your documents and I distribute it to everyone on the definition committee, we can also probably distribute them to the full board if in fact we want to, at the next meeting in April, kind of have the individual committee meetings, in this case, the architect committee, discuss what you've sent out. It may not take you a separate meeting. I'm just throwing that out there. You don't always meet and have enough applications or things of that nature. And so we could definitely meet at that point in April and go over this.
Yeah, that's where I was headed.
Perfect.
With that.
Perfect.
But in the meantime, I think I would get back with the Tennessee AIA and the NCARB to just double check with them, let them know where we're headed, and that if they've got any additional input, I'd like to know it now.
And this is Blair. I likewise will get back with CLARB and ASLA and report back to this committee.
Okay, so where that,
We'll have a,
go ahead. Go ahead.
this is Blair. I'm assuming that we will have a definitions committee meeting at our next full board meeting date.
Well, I don't know, but we'll find out.
Okay.
I'll send something out either beforehand or we'll meet at that time. But right now, we're just
Okay.
kind of trying to decide. It depends on where the engineering committee wants to go with this. If they want to do some stuff between now and then, or if they want to wait, because frankly, I'm not in a position. I would not suggest to you that I'm ready to say, here's what the engineering committee thinks, because we do not have consensus on the issue. So we've either got to meet and start developing a consensus on the issue prior to the next board meeting, or at the board meeting, we'll start that process. So I don't want to tell you that we will do that until I've had a chance to ask them what they want to do.
Okay.
And for all the reasons that I just said, our definition and our process is probably going to be a lot more involved than what you all have, as far as already having a definition that you think that your membership, your population that you represent would be comfortable with. We got a lot more stakeholders that need to be given the opportunity to weigh in before we put something on paper and say, this is where we stand. So, having said all that, do y'all want to keep talking some more and have some more conversation on this, or are y'all ready to call it a meeting and we'll follow up by email?
This is Frank. I have one question.
Go
I
ahead.
know you started out with the meeting saying that we need to. We're all assuming that we're going ahead with this, and that that the intent would be to, if we have something to propose, that it would be a rule making process, so to speak. Do we need to vote that we need to go ahead with this? I mean, if we have a vote that's no, then we stop the committee and go home.
Well, I'm sitting here. I have the benefit of sitting with Roxana and Ashley, and they're both shaking their head no, we don't need to vote on anything right now. And I would say that also, again, for all the reasons that I was just talking about, I'm not sure that I want to vote on behalf of the entire engineering committee on anything yet. I do feel like I want to go back to the engineering committee and get more consensus from them before I sit here and say, here's what the committee thinks. But they're also giving me the thumbs down that no, there's nothing to vote on yet because we haven't made any real decisions. Fair enough, ladies? Yes. Okay. So is that okay with you, Frank? We'll just have an informal understanding that we are continuing to move forward on the rulemaking process.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Kathy, this is Susan. May I make one little announcement? I am leaving the country March the 12th through the 23rd. I'm going back to China and Vietnam. So if y'all decide to have a meeting during those 2 weeks, I will not be in the country. So
You wouldn't be willing to call in?
it's a 14-hour time difference.
That would be hard for you.
Hard.
No, we appreciate you letting us know. That sounds fine.
Okay. All right.
Alrighty. So to summarize, then here's where we are. Everybody feels like we're at least informally moving down the path of rulemaking relative to a definition for each of the definitions. We have a list. Definition for each of the disciplines. We do have a list of various societies and other stakeholders, and Frank feels that the architects are ready. Susan feels that the interior designers are ready. Blair is on the fence but is open-minded relative to defining landscape architecture. And Kathy is going to start working with the engineering committee and see where we go. Let's see. We have some boilerplate language from all the different national level organizations, which are going to be a starting point for everyone. And we're going to possibly reconvene via telephone conference before the next board meeting And if not, we will let you know so that at that board meeting, we will meet. At the latest, we will meet at that board meeting. Did I leave anything out? All righty. Well, I appreciate everybody making time for this. I did try to keep it to an hour. I'm sorry we ran over, but we'll try to be efficient with our time, and appreciate everybody's contributions. Roxanne, anything else we need to do?
No, I think you did it. Great.
Okay.
Great. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you so much.
you all.
And we will talk with everyone soon. Y'all have a wonderful rest of the week.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.